We are here to talk about Nelson Reynoso's book from Bronx Community College from the USA called Promoting Resilience and Inspiration, an Autoethnographic Study of Dominican-American Students. This book was published by Springler. I don't know if you pronounce it like that. And as the title says, the topic of the book is to find the key components, I would say, that would allow Dominican students in college to success and be able to finish their college education. Nelson has been working on a community college in Bronx for a long time and has dedicated most of his life, his professional life, to try to help Dominican students to succeed on this challenge. So what we have in the book is a combination of his own story, his own autobiographic story about himself, who is from Dominican Republic, and all the problems he faced on this process, this complicated process of immigration, family separation, poverty, not being able to speak English, and then going back to Dominican Republic and not being able to speak Spanish, and a lot of difficult things that he faced to be able to finally succeed as he is now a tenured professor at Bronx Community College. He does combine his autobiographic story with history, with that of some students, Dominican students, who he interviewed with another colleague some years before, which are more like life histories of different students, and it's an account of what they found on those histories. And he then helps himself to provide us with an interpretation of what happened to them and him using the theoretical framework of positive psychology. So this is a combination of autobiography. He used grounded theory, as I understand, to interpret the life histories of the students, and the theoretical framework of positive psychology to try to pinpoint the major topics that would help Dominican students in particular, and I'd say Hispanic immigrants, to be able to succeed on this harsh process. So did I read you right, Nelson?
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Silvia.
Well, I think I was wondering why Tony asked me to be here. And I think it is because I wrote a book on how I went through the process of learning to live in a smaller city. I was born in Mexico City, then studied in the States and came back, and I live in a much smaller city in inner Mexico. And it was a very complicated process for me. And I started doing the same thing. I interviewed people who had come from bigger metropolitan areas. Using grounded theory, I analyzed some of those long interviews I made. And then during that process, I ran into autoethnography and took a course with Caroline Alice, and a short course with but Woodall. And then I decided that it was very important to talk about my own story. So I did that in a kind of a parallel process. And it's not that I want to talk about my own book, but to emphasize the difference it made to me to talk about myself and to write my own story instead of focusing. I'm a sociologist, I'm not a psychologist, but we are trained to focus on the outside, on other people and their story, and try not to contaminate it with ours. So it was an interesting process to see how I went from trying to be objective when I talk to them and how I went through that process of writing my own story and how it changed my perception and what it meant and all the challenges it implied. So, thinking about this process and reading your book, Nelson, I wonder how much. I think you went through the same process. You interviewed students first, you had your own story. You were a professor then, or you
Mhm.
were finishing your PhD and going through the tenure, painful tenure process. But I would like you to tell us how you compare those two processes, or how writing about your own story changed how you viewed the story of the students.
Yes, thank you. Very good question, Sylvia. When I first began this project of looking into the students, right, to see what factors were contributing, we have a very high retention problem. I mean,
Mm.
many students leave the college, they were not graduating on time, they're having multiple issues. So by studying them, and I come from a psychology background, so we were taught, for instance, to just look at the data, right?
Mhm.
Analyze it, and maintain a distance. We have to be objective, right? So I always felt that, even though my professors, wanted me to write that way, they wanted me to leave the self out, but I always had that urge that I wanted somehow to tell my own story, because since I was working at Bronx Community College, I don't know those of you who know Bronx Community College, most of the students, 80% are non-traditional students. Many 40% come from the Dominican Republic. So there was a lot of similarities between their story and my story. And
Yeah.
I began gradually. I attended a conference on autoethnography, a colleague had recommended. And right away, I knew that this was something that I wanted to pursue further, because it would allow me to immerse my story within the context of this wider story of the Dominican experience in college. So I think having that merging of the two, that's what happened. I saw this strength that when I brought my story in, that I began to see the data from a different perspective that I had not seen before. And that shed a lot of light into this in terms of helping my students to retain them better in college, to understand their experiences. But I did it through understanding my own, because I had never examined my own life. And I could tell, I don't know if you want me to, I could go into a little bit. I arrived from the Dominican Republic at the age of 5. Um, my parents migrated. Like most immigrants across the world that come to the United States in search of the American dream,
Mhm.
right? And this is something that had been happening for many years. First, people from Europe coming to the United States, and then, immigrants from across the world. So they venture out. But one of the things that happen, and I don't think happens so much in other migrations that we see from other countries, where people that come from Latin America or the Caribbean, Latinos, they tend to, the family is broken, you see? And I study that as a trauma because in my case, when I began to look at my own story, I said, wow, I was only 5. That means that my parents left me. Think about it from a developmental psychological point of view. All the data that shows and the study that says that when you separate that attachment between the mother or the parents and the child, that's very traumatic for the child, right? So I was exposed to that at a very young age, you know. So I in the book I talk about those challenges as a separation, that cultural separation, and the scar that it left because it leaves a scar. You see, as one grows up, I don't know in your situation, Sylvia, but in my situation, as I grew up, I began to, especially as I got into the autoethnography, because that's when you become vulnerable, right? Because I never experienced that before until I began to examine autoethnography. So I hope that answered your question somehow.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the probably the most significant issue that you experienced through going um, into your story
Hmm.
and try to be to understand it, because when you meet students, you meet them when they are in college,
Hmm.
and you probably don't think about all that process that could have started. I mean, you were 5, you probably didn't remember many things, and it seems like it's not necessarily related. But when you write your story, you realize how many things that you did not consider when you did the research,
Hmm.
focusing on the students as they are now.
Right.
You could realize how many things were significant to your own process. So
Yeah.
that was very interesting to me, because I don't know if it's very common still now, but I think Mexican immigrants don't come and go so much. Children, they
Hmm.
once they go, they tend to stay because they have no papers, and it's hard for them to return unless they kick them out.
Right. My
Um,
father he came with a what we call that time. It was easier to get a visa. Uh,
mhm.
so he came on a visa, but he overstayed his visa because he wanted to stay here because, right, he had 5 children to support, and it was just very difficult back in the Dominican Republic. So he came, overstayed the visa, and then he is caught by the immigration authorities while working in a factory. And both of my parents, that's what they did. They work in a factory.
Yeah.
He said they told him, "Look, you better go. You cannot stay here any longer." Right? At this point, I was still living in the Dominican Republic. He then decides, okay, I'm going to leave the country voluntarily and then apply for a visa while over there. And that's why he was able to come back again when he applied for a permanent resident, and he was able to get that. Um, so it was easier back then to get visa than now. Now it's very difficult, especially with this political climate that we are in. Uh, Immigrants now have other issues that are more difficult, especially when you have challenges. Like for instance, let me give you an example. I have a student right now that is here illegally, right? She was raised here. She came here when she was 5, my age, right? She came from Costa Rica. And right now, the mother is illegal here. She doesn't have any documents. And this student, she's in college, not in Bronx Community College, but she's in a different college. She's almost graduating, very bright young lady. But psychologically, she's feeling this trauma, right, of the experience that she's in at this moment, not her choosing, but because this is the way it is. And it's heartbroken. For me, it's just heartbreaking to see. um, people that are here trying to contribute to the society, right? And having such difficulties uh, to try to get through and get their paperwork in order. I mean, Latinos in general, have made a big contribution to this country, and it's just heartbreaking to see how the government has turned their back on many of them that are just here because they want to make the country better. I think I lost you. I can't microphone.
I was muted and I didn't realize.
Okay.
That leads me to a question. In terms of, I think you have a very positive, there must be a better word, but opinion about the United States as the best country in the world. And it made me wonder, uh, or the American dream, the possibility of really having the American dream realized. And it was kind of surprising to me.
Mhm.
Do you really think so?
Well, I will say that there is no perfection, of course. You know, each country has its strength, its weaknesses. From my point of view, you know, I don't think I would have been where I am today had my
Mhm,
parents not migrated to this country. And that's not to say that, of course, there are things that are terribly wrong still, and things that I face, and I talk about it in my book. You know, I face extreme poverty.
mhm,
You see, I faced discrimination. I face violence by growing up in very dangerous neighborhoods that were infested with drugs.
mhm,
So I faced a lot of trauma as a child. Let me give you a brief story. I remember one day I was in my bedroom. It was about 9 o'clock at night, getting ready. I must have been watching television, like I usually do in the evening once I came from high school. All of a sudden, I started hearing gunshots. The first thing that I did was to look out the window, which I think, looking back at that, might have been a little foolish of me because stray bullets are ways that people are killed every time in Washington Heights, where I grew up.
mhm,
But I was somehow immune to this violence that I saw on a day-to-day basis. Drug dealers selling drugs in the street corners where I saw them on a day-to-day basis. This particular night, I even witnessed additional violence. I right away became very scared, and especially when I saw a couple of bodies laying on the floor. The first thought that came to my mind was that one of my friends, you see? So, and I share this story because it's like, of course, things can be better in the US, but I also like to believe, and I bring my positive psychology approach framework that I've used in the book, that if I don't have hope for this
yeah.
country, or my experience, I will never be able to get through the adversities that I went through. And I see that when I interview the students that were part of this project, they had similar experiences as well. So I'm sort of like comparing my stories and saying, wait a minute, these students are also saying similar things, or they are experiencing similar things as I am.
Yeah, I understand what you're
Yeah.
saying. And that brings me to the point of positive psychology. And it is there's always that thing that autoethnography talks about, the painful things and the things that are on the margins that nobody talks about, right?
Right, right.
And that the person who writes the autoethnography finds the strength to talk about those painful things and how vulnerability was there. Um, and that if I compare that to positive psychology, it seems like positive psychology tries to do the contrary, right? And I think it has very good points about it, how you have to find which are the positive things about this whole situation that would allow students to be resilient. You say in English,
Resilient.
right?
Yes, yes,
Resilient.
yes, yes.
Okay. So it was good to see the contrast, you know.
Hmm, hmm,
And before I forget, when you talk about, like this happening in your life, and then when you talk about your brother's death toward the end of the book,
hmm,
it shows me that there is a lot more to say. As you were telling Margie, that it's never ending.
hmm,
It seems like at the beginning it was more this happened, this happened, this happened. And then when you talk about your own experience, or when you talked about your brother at the beginning, it was like,
hmm.
well, what happened? I was wondering what happened, what happened. And then when you talk about spiritual strength, and then you are a lot more detallado on your description of what happened with your brother.
Hmm,
It gives a much more human perspective on issues.
hmm.
It would be great for you to write more about. I mean, it could be positive things. It's not that I want you to talk about all the bad things, but it's like 2 points, and I did it because I didn't want to forget how you talk about, yeah, autoethnography, and how it talks about how we can overcome all those burdens in our
Obstacles.
processes, and also being more detallado on your writing, like more like Clifford says about thick descriptions.
Hmm, hmm.
Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Um, and you said at the beginning, and I like that oftentimes when we write about these extremely difficult experiences, right? Uh,
Yeah,
Such as the one that you mentioned, I do mention it in the book. Sometimes we, as writers, we also have to, and I think one of the things that I learned about the ethnography is that there's also, uh, depending on where you are in the process, that you have to write until you feel safe. You see,
yeah.
so I think that
Mhm.
is why perhaps, and I see what you're saying, and I agree 100%. But that's one of the, it was a very challenging and difficult experience for me, especially the death of my brother, uh, because it's sort of like, as people come to this country, they also bring the vulnerabilities and the challenges, and to realize that not everything is going to be great. You see, so there is not. When I look at the American dream, the American dream is full of good things, but it's also full of bad things, especially for immigrants, because when you bring your child from a different country, most of the time you're going to end up living in in a poor neighborhood where perhaps your chances of living of raising your child are very slim. I know a lot of my friends, for instance, they didn't make it. They are dead. They died at very young ages, and they went through uh, difficult things, got involved in gangs and drug dealings and everything, you know. Uh, you may say, okay, so how come, what makes you unique? How come you didn't go that route? You know, La Familia, the family. I was fortunate that my parents both believe in education and really, inspired me to get an education. But it was challenging. I remember going to school, and my many of my friends in the neighborhood, they were cutting classes, and they would say, "Where are you going? Why are you wasting your time? Why are you doing that? You see the culture." So all these things are extremely challenging to write. Towards the end, as I talked to one of the participants, she talked about spirituality and how that helped her get through her challenges. And I think that is a way that you connect to the stories of others. And then that's why at that point, you see, something magical happened, right? And I think you alluded to that, where now I felt, wow, I can get deeper into the subject of my brother's death, you see? And therefore, I write using more of the emotional. And that was a great, interesting part of the book, because when I first heard her story, it made me cry in a way, because how spirituality has the power to strength, and it's a major component of resilience. So it helped me also to see resilience not from a Western perspective, you see, where it's more individualistic, but more from a cultural or intercultural perspective, right? And in the process, I'm sort of building a new model of resiliency that perhaps is not told or it's not heard, because these voices have never been to the forefront. So it's an interesting dynamic, and I'm glad that you. That's a great question. Thank you for that.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you, Nelson. It's wonderful too that you could open up through the story of someone else's,
Yes,
of a student, and you allowed yourself to talk about how spirituality, another thing that we're not very encouraged to talk about in academia,
no,
was so significant to allow you to be more resilient. I don't know how you say it in English.
resilient. Yeah, you're
Uh-huh.
doing good. Yeah.
Thank you.
So getting back to this point of my brother's death, when he dies, then and he died at 29, very young.
Yeah,
Um, and I felt also that I needed to do something different, in terms to honor his death. Um, so it was a source of strength for me in a way, uh, when I began to examine my own spirituality as well, and helped me to get through many challenges that I was facing during that period of his passing. Uh, so also in death, you can also find healing.
yeah,
And I think that's what also, when I talked to the student, that also it was like, sort of like a healing process, you know, that I was going through as I analyzed the data.
yeah. That was very, very nice. And something else in terms of how you now talking about how the dialogue between your own story
Hmm.
and theirs interacted. I was wondering when you talk about the issues that are significant,
Hmm.
it seems like you came up with FICO. You came up with a few with a some things that you pinpointed as very relevant to be resilient.
Hmm.
And I was wondering how much of that came from your grounded theory analysis, or how much that went through your own process of dealing with your own story.
Yeah, I think it was a combination of the two.
Hmm.
As I go through the narratives, right, I read them and I reread them. And then as I went through my own story and challenges, I look for patterns, for themes that emerge as a result of looking at both, right? My own stories, but also comparing it to those stories that I capture in my participants, right? So, for instance, when I see the issue of bicultural identity comes up, I was, I was look that came from my own analysis of my own story, but also looking at the stories of the participants. When I noticed that many of them at the beginning, they had issues, uh, in terms of, well, I'm going to go back to my country. I don't like it here. I don't speak the language. It's very hard. Uh, it was hard for me too. I noticed the same similarity when I first came to this country. It was very challenging in terms of the language, acculturation stresses that we face. I face, but also my participants face the same problems. I remember, for instance, being bullied in my fifth grade class just because I couldn't speak English, just because I couldn't speak English, but also because of this color of my skin. And I was bullied at a very young age. And I think uh, when I look at that, I ask myself, did other students that I talked to experience similar things? And I noticed that yes, they did. Many in college, other students will laugh. The English native students will laugh of their accents, and they talked about that with me and said, "Wow, I feel it makes me feel less smart. It lets me feel um, it's stressful. I don't like it. You know, so all these themes that shows up is a combination of my own story, but also by analyzing their themes as well. Now, when I began to look at how positive psychology was uh, affected, I noticed that especially myself, right, I began to think differently about how those feelings that I had, right, of incapability, for instance, feelings that I was not as good as other people, right? If I would continue to have those feelings, that would set me up for most likely failure because you know that feelings in psychology lead to behavior, right? If I have those feelings, so right away I knew that I had to change those thoughts of and say to myself, I am good enough. And that's where the positive psychology framework comes in because now I am changing the discussion from a deficit model to a more of an optimistic model, but also helps me change the thought, right? So in psychology, we say that neural pathways are formed when, or they say that thoughts are very powerful, right? Your thoughts are very powerful. You become what you think, right? So if you're constantly thinking, well, it's going to be a bad day today, then most likely you're going to behave that way and you're going to have a bad day. But if you have some optimistic perspective of problems, even problems, it helps you get through them better. And that includes, of course, spirituality that I just mentioned, or other factors that can promote resilience. So by doing this, it sort of helped me to get through the adversities. And then I also saw the same patterns in my students that they were getting through their own challenges in a similar way by looking at their strength and also having hope for the future that things will get better and that they will too also become successful. And many of them are now professionals. Many, talk about Junior, for example. He was one of my participants. He majored in radiology technology. He's a radiologist technician now in a major hospital. And he talked about when he first came in, similar like myself, not learning English. He didn't know English when he first came into this country, but he didn't even have a high school diploma. But yet, there was this urge in him to try to use education as a way of upward mobility. And I think these students in this book are very uh, inspirational because they teach us that resilience is not something that is quiet. I mean, not quiet. I'm talking about resilience is something that's quiet behind the scenes. That everyone has this. We all have this resilience within us. It's just a matter of tapping into it, right? And looking at it from a cultural perspective.
Thank you, Nelson. That makes me, I think that's what I learned the most about your book, that you can focus on the positive to make, to explain what happened and what are the positive issues that can really contribute for people to be successful on their well, first finishing college and then as your student went on and be able to have much better job than if he had not been able to be successful
Mhm.
in college. Mm,
But I
and
think
again,
also, oh, sorry,
tell me.
that
Yeah,
I
you go
think the
ahead.
other thing that I wanted to just add that in that success, you also pay the price. You see, Sylvia, you also
Mm-hmm.
pay the price. And that's how I connect my parents' immigration. You see, for instance, they came to this country, but they pay the price. They suffer. Perhaps, my mother always says, wow, if we would have stayed back home, will my brother be alive still?
Oh,
You see what I mean?
uh-huh.
Yeah. So there's a
Mhm.
price that we pay. And I
Mhm.
think doing this project really helped me understand that you're right. Their strength, the cultural assets, the resilience of immigration, all of that is great, but as well, sometimes we do pay a price. And that's what it's all about. But we have to stay optimistic. We have to stay positive. And I mean, I attended a session yesterday. I don't know if you had attended that session, which was I learned a lot also about the session because it was by Claude Helen Mayer in her book on what she calls positive autoethnography. And I actually got the book myself because I think I'm gonna look more into that as it relates a lot to my own book. And in her book, she looks at autoethnography from as a way of illuminating strength, cultural assets, and resilience as well. So something interesting.
Yeah, it really is. And now, yet that you talk about your proficiency in English and the place it played on your whole process of learning to live in the US. And as you talk about students, I reflect myself on them as well because I studied in the US. I didn't speak English. I don't speak English uh, good enough to be a, a full English speaker, and how you deal with those things as not being enough, and how those paced your capacity to overcome being in at the university. Well, I was a graduate student
Mhm.
for 6 years, and I was glad that people started. Well, more and more lately, they start talking about what it means for even for international students who are not undocumented or who have not. I mean, we were privileged because we got scholarships, we could work there as students and stuff, but it was very hard. And we paid a price, that's for sure.
Mhm.
It was very hard. Yeah.
Yes, it is very hard. I mean, when I look at my own academic career, it's full of challenges from
Yeah.
having problems through the tenure process, and
Mm,
as a student, not having enough support from faculty. It was a lot of challenges, but like again, I think one of the things that I try to weave into this project is that I've always been resilient, and I've always used my own strength to see how I could get through difficult situations, and that could be, having finding resources to conduct my own study, which I did. Oftentimes, I had to do the studies without any resources at all. But
mhm,
I sort of kept going, kept going until because I think, like one of my participants said, you have to do things with love. En español, tiene que hacer
sí.
todo con amor.
Mm,
That's in Spanish. I mean, that's a very short phrase. You have to do things with love. But when he said that, it really helped me understand and embrace what this my own career, because I love my students, and I love working with them, and I love helping them, and and I think that's genuine, and they're able to pick it up, and it makes me proud to give something back, because I was also fortunate to have received um, mentorship from very good professors.
mm,
Some of these Latinos, white professors, uh, from different countries. And I think that's what makes diversity so wonderful, that uh,
mm,
we can all work together, we can learn by each other, we could support each other, and hopefully we'll have a better world if we do more of that.
That's nice.
Yes.
And that leads me to probably the last question because
Sure.
we're getting to the end of the time. Um, you talk about how your culture and values and even your spirituality and your
Hmm.
family were like sources where you could find the strength to
Hmm.
deal with a culture that's so different. And I can see how they are much more communitarian, more traditional values. And you talk about how you could find that balance between living in a country that, to say it simply, emphasizes more individual values, which I'm not
Hmm.
that sure about anymore,
Right.
but than countries from Latin America, like the
Hmm.
Dominican Republic. And you talk about Dominican Americans. It
Hmm.
and it made me wonder. I think about my classmates and the ones who came from Mexico, and
Right.
I had some from Dominican Republic. Very nice people, very happy, good dancers, and it was great.
Hmm.
But how they were very emphatic about saying we're not like them. You know, we praise family, we are more, we're not as competitive, we cooperate with others, we have different values, money is not that important. And it really helped them to go through the process easier.
Hmm.
And thinking about me, I was not that sure then, and I'm not still sure now, but it seems like you convey the idea that you could balance out those values. So that
Hmm.
would be
Hmm.
interesting to,
Yeah.
I think, to talk about that.
Yeah. Let me just say that it wasn't easy to do that balance.
Mm,
Uh, it was a challenge. Sometimes, especially when I was younger, since I was maybe 6, 7, 8, um, yeah, I was very, because I had been traveling back and forth, right?
mhm,
Uh, so it wasn't like I came here when I was 5 and I stayed in this country. When I was 7, my family decided, let's return back home, because they just didn't assimilate to this country. It was just too hard for them. My father didn't like it, so he took the whole family. We went back to the Dominican Republic. So I lived over there. You see that? I
yeah.
lived there for a couple more years, but then As our family got bigger, again, my father experienced financially problems, and he said, we have to go back because it's just too hard. You see? So while I was living there as a child, that's why I incorporate all these values from over there, the
Yeah.
spirituality, the sense of family, my own, looking at how my own family. But then I come here, and then there's a contrast. You see, that shock,
Hmm.
right? And I see things here. People are more individualistic. There is no family oriented as much as we had over there. But I was exposed to those values here. So
Hmm.
as a child, think about it. It creates a lot of what we call in psychology cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
You see? And I think that's what happened to me. So I had to, as I grew up, I needed to reconcile that cognitive dissonance somehow.
Hmm.
You see?
Hmm.
And I think looking at those students in my work as a professor of psychology facilitated that for me. And listening to the stories that I talked about in the book helped me as well to see that we can negotiate these identities as we go through life, and that's why I learned to do. It got easier, especially when I marry my Dominican wife.
Mm.
She grounded me. You know, Dominican wives are very strong women, right? And we met in college, and that played a tremendous had a tremendous impact in my identity. And she said, "Yeah, you're not full. Are you more Dominican or are you more?" It's sort of like I continued that negotiation, and I think I was leaning more to becoming more my true self of a Dominican than an American, right? So it's interesting because when I look back on my own childhood, if I were to be speaking to my child when I was a child, I would say to him, that it's okay to connect with your roots. You see, it's okay to speak Spanish, which I talk to my students all the time. It's okay to be grounded in the community and see the family as an important value. And I think that really, inspired me. When I looked at the stories that the students told, they were very Dominican, right? But they also realized that they were now in this country for whatever reason they came, but that now they had a function in this country somehow,
Mhm.
right? Many of them are working, uh, and they incorporated some of the elements that they like about this country, and then they threw away those elements that they didn't like about this country. For example, the competitiveness. I
Mhm.
really don't like myself. I don't like that part. I prefer to work together with people, and that's what I do. I like working better. Because I bring those values into my work and also into my life. That's a great question. And I know we're running out of time, right? I don't want to
Yeah, I
talk too
think
long.
that this last
Yes,
talk about values and how you merged,
merge the
or
two.
yeah, that would be a good way to finish this presentation, and congratulate you for your efforts, for the big effort you made,
Thank you.
and to go on with the process and the products.
Thank you.
Probably this whole issue that you talked about at the end may be worth more research.
More
Very
research,
interesting.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also want to
Thank you
thank
very
you.
much.
Yeah, thank you. I also want to thank you because when you remember when I got into this field of autoethnography, right? I contacted Carolyn Ellis. And I
Yeah.
asked her, Carolyn, I'm interested in doing an autoethnography. What do you think? And she said, well, these are the books you got to read. And she mentioned your name.
Oh.
And okay, and I remember, I don't know if you remember, I reached out to you. This is many, many years ago. I sent you
Oh.
an email, and you were able to get me some references that and as well, I seemed that you gave me that support that I needed. So thank you for your role also as a scholar in autoethnography, and especially in bilingual, because there's not a lot of people that
Hmm.
speak both languages like we do, and that we work in two worlds in a way. I like to see us as working in two worlds. So thank you for your scholarly achievement as well.
I'm very honored to hear your words, and I'm glad I was of some aid
Yeah,
to
that's
your
why when
work.
Tony asked me, who do you want? You have anybody in mind? You were the first person I thought about.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I
You're
feel
welcome.
very honored.
It was a pleasure, Sylvia. Thank you very much.
The same here. Well, I think we have to say goodbye for the moment to let the other talks go on.
Do we have time for some
And
questions?
hmm?
Do we have time for at least one question, you think?
Oh, I was kind of confused talk about cultural differences in terms of how they do book presentations here. But yeah, if you guys are willing to stay a little bit longer and make questions, I would be very pleased to listen to them and go on with it more for a few minutes.
Yeah, sure.
Of
Nelson,
Thank
course.
Nelson, I have to apologize. I have not read your book. And if you want to send me a copy, I would be more than willing
you.
to read and review for some publication. But I'm wondering if you found this idea of there's a book by Wes Moore who became the governor of Maryland. And I know his name only because I was in a bookstore one time, picked up a book called The Other Wes Moore. And what he found was someone in his neighborhood who comes out of that violence that you talk about,
Mhm.
right? And how he was able to get out of it and how this guy was not able to get out of it, but they both have the same name. And
Mm.
it came down to him to mentors. It wasn't so much about family because he had a very kind of crazy family life. It was mentors. Did you find that in you talked about professors who actually helped you and mentored
Yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah.
So I'm wondering if mentorship plays into any of those stories for those interviewees.
Yes. If you look at the book and when you read the book, there was a couple of the students say that I was their mentor.
Mm.
Okay, so that's a great point. In
Yeah.
my own analysis of my own story, I write also about mentors in my own life, but also as I was moving through academia, right? For
Hmm.
instance, I was making another presentation on the book last week, right? And I talked to one of my mentors. Um, I share a story with her. I don't know if I have time to share it briefly, but just to share a little bit. Let me just share a little bit of what I told her, so you can see. This is what I said to her, right? And I wrote it down because it was like, do you remember one day when I was sick and I had been hospitalized for 5 days for thyroid problems? My life was I felt my life was over. As a faculty, I was not able to teach my students. As a father, I was not able to hug my daughter. I felt frustrated, right? Then you called me when I got home from the hospital. And I remember that you told me that I could do it, that you will get better. I told her that I had to go to Florida to present a paper, but I didn't want to because I was too weak. I decided not to go to the presentation after I finished your talking with you on the phone. You inspired me, and I just said thank you, and I just hang up. But that was an example of mentorship and how powerful. So I'm really happy you brought that question because you're right. It plays an important role in resiliency.
Okay.
Great. We have some questions and comments in the chat. Someone shared the other Westmore link, the book for the
Oh,
book that,
oh,
that
thank you.
Maggie was talking about. And Catherine Mary Crowell asks you if I'd love to know what book you think would be a good starting point for positive psychology, please.
Yes, one of the best books will be the by Martin Seligman. He is he's at the University of Pennsylvania, and he's a clinical psychologist. In the book, he talks about the definition of positive psychology, but also the transition in the field of psychology from a negative or pessimistic view to an
Mm,
optimistic view, right? In psychology, what we were doing, many, many years was focusing on what's wrong with people, right?
mhm,
Mhm.
So Seligman, he was the president
yeah,
of the
yeah,
American Psychological Association. He came up with this new, and others, there were other scholars that felt that psychology should also look at what's right with people.
yeah,
And when I saw that, it lit a spark in my brain. I said, wow, that is so
mm,
powerful. And that right away, I incorporated that because I was noticing that's what I was doing. I was
mhm,
focusing
yeah,
on what's right with my students, while others were focusing on what's wrong with them.
mhm, yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great perspective to try to shift to that and see what
Yeah.
are our personal resources to.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because positive
Mm,
psychology is looking at our strength, you see. And I
mhm,
tell my students, we all have strength. But yet, that first day of class, when I tell them in one of the classes that I teach, I tell them, what are your strengths? Guess what? They don't say anything.
no, yeah,
The room is very quiet. And I
right.
think it's an opportunity for us to say, you know what? Let's dig a little further, right, into
Mm,
our souls so we can at least find out what strength we have. And sometimes it's a process. Sometimes it may mean that in order for you to discover your strength, you may have to do some volunteer work, right?
mhm,
Like I did. I used to do a lot of volunteer work when I was younger. And I think doing all these volunteer work helped me to understand what are my strengths as well.
right.
Okay.
Does anyone else have a question for Nelson? Or let me see. We have 2 more minutes that we
Okay.
could force time to.
So I found that book, Martin Siegelman, Authentic
Seligman.
Happiness. That's the title that came up for me in Amazon.
Authentic
Yeah,
happiness.
that's the one. That's the
Okay.
one.
Yeah.
And he
Hmm.
goes through the stages of authentic happiness and positive emotions, experiencing positive emotions as a way of really uh, looking at this. I also like the part where he talks about in the book that through challenges, right? When you have a challenge, regardless what it is, you could look at it from a negative perspective, but also you could look at it from a positive perspective. And I
Mhm.
think it helps. It's sort of like a problem solving. He gives you some techniques, like how to solve problems through positive psychology, because you are strengthened in a way, as opposed to being defeated and saying, well, I have this problem. I'm not gonna succeed in life. And I noticed that many of my students were really using a lot of this optimistic thinking to help them get through the difficult challenge. Again, I refer back to one of the students, Junior. He had a problem. He was almost going to graduate from college because of his writing. He could not pass the English test. He took the test 3 times. We all
Mhm.
know that many of these standardized exams are biased, right? And,
Mhm.
and he was frustrated. He felt like giving up. But one of the things that he said to himself was, you know what? Although this test is challenging, I'm gonna go and take it again, right? And he took the test. I think after the fourth try, he passed it. And that was the happiest moment in his life. So I think it's a great idea, as the Martin Seligman talked about in the book, that when you have a challenge, to think about it from an optimistic point of view,
Mhm.
instead of a pessimistic point of view. Well, I want to thank everybody for participating today. Thank you for joining me